98 carp across the deck of the Lady Pearl that first year. I doubt if you'd repeat it on the river today.
Got to admit, it does feel a little bit odd to be moving the boat after all these years, you know? The old Pearl has got a lot more adventures left in her yet. Off to pastures new.
The further up you went, it turned into more of a wilderness. Lovely.
First night on the new moorings, and I got one.
Where it was the public moorings, it was also where a lot of people used to feed the birds. And I'd put a lot of bait there, so it was always going to be somewhere I was going to go back to. Just didn't start off as planned. I got a phone call that the big one had been found dead. Sometimes you get your timing just that little bit out, and that was that far out, that's all. Me and Dad had had the boat on the Thames for over a decade, you know. We'd never needed a 50-pounder to have the time of our life before.
How's that, eh, mate?
So already I'd had a couple of proper prizes, you know, as far as the River Thames goes, and I still had a whole summer to look forward to. Comparing it to if I was on a lake through the summer, it's not really any different. You know, I think half the time we know that it's all about that morning, that dawn, first light period, you know, and the rest of the time we're camping. But obviously we stay put to hold our swim, and you know, and often it's too far to drive to go home and then keep coming back, the same as on the boat. But I didn't want to be doing that every day, so I used to stay. And obviously I'd boat up and down the stretch as well. I'd still be learning stuff, you know, I'd be boating from one end of the stretch to the other. But yeah, it's not really that much different. It feels like you're wasting so much time, but you're not. You know, you can only catch them when they're feeding, you know. We had temperatures up to 37 degrees, you know, it was really, really hot, baking hot summer. And if it was that sort of hot, then I used to find somewhere shady through the daytimes. Quite often I'd come back to the moorings, sort of every 2 days I'd come back to the moorings and go and have a shower. I didn't like to hang around on the moorings for too long because it's quite open and exposed there. And by sort of midday, it was baking. Like, you know, what you've got to think is, you know, the boat's my bivvy, but at the end of the day, it's like a greenhouse. You know, it really, really does get hot on a boat. So it was important to find the shady bits. There was one time when I remember I came back to the moorings, and before I'd gone out in the morning, there'd been, if you imagine the moorings, by that stage, the marina where I was, there's like 3 marinas, and I'm in the smallest one, which was sort of closest to the entrance to the Thames. And it's more of a lagoon, really. You know, it's sort of 4 or 5 foot deep. You could see the bottom, it was crystal clear, but it got really, really weedy by that point, literally sort of up to sort of that far below the surface, solid weed. And I remember turning up, getting back to the moorings and noticing that a boat must have reversed round just off the tail end of my boat and then pulled out again. And it must have been a big boat, and its props had turned, it basically raked a spot for me. You know, imagine it was all solid weed, and then I've come back, looked, and I've got a lovely clear sandy spot about the size of an umbrella, more of a strip shape, you know, but right off the back of the boat. And I thought, oh, that looked. So I threw a few boilies on it, like you do. Went and had a shower, come back, tied up the hook links for the night and all that. And I looked off the back of the boat, and there was one feeding there. And it was that fully scaled mirror that I'd already caught on opening morning, you know, 30-pounder. Although, to be honest, it didn't look quite as big. They'd spawned since then, you know, so he was probably a bit smaller. But he was there troughing, tail up in the air and all that. Now, obviously I didn't want to catch him again, you know, so he swam off. I put a bit more bait there, tried to get my head down for a couple of hours. And it was more dozing, you know, in that sort of heat. It feels like the sun's, feels like you've got glass there and it's just penetrating. It's so hot at that time of the year. But I remember getting up, all drowsy and stuff, thought, I'll make myself a cup of tea. And then I remembered that fully scaled. I'd forgotten all about him. And I thought, oh, and I got up, stood up, looked, and there was 4 tails in the air, literally right off the back of the boat, all feeding their heads off, like, you know. So I got a rod ready. They were that close to the back of the boat that I wouldn't have wanted to have the tip, like 12 foot of rod, sort of stuck out over the back. The tip would have been above their heads. That's how close they was to me. Anyway, I got a rod ready, snowman rig on it and what have you. And now I sort of stood against one side of the boat. The fish had all done the off and gone further into the little duck pond where my boat was moored. So I'm sort of stood there looking, and every so often I'm looking over the edge waiting for them, because they don't know they treat the boats like cover, you know. They don't know I'm on it and there's an angler there waiting to catch them, you know. So I'm waiting for them to swim back past. And 2 or 3 minutes must have passed, and the first one came through. And it wasn't that fully, like, you know, he's come through. And I've seen him get to the little clear opening over the top of the weed, and then his tail's fan. You know, you see the curl, he's sort of gone down there. God, he's right on it. Like, so I got down low, and the rod is up in the air. Like I say, I can't have it straight, so it's up in the air with like just a slack line going into the hole in the weed. I sat down low, and all I can see is the slack line off the tip. And that fish must have only dropped down for about 5 or 6 seconds early. You know, it's just gone down like that. I've crouched down low, then I've seen the line go whip up. I was on him straight away, like, you know what I mean? But you're in quite a confined area. You know, the fully scaled, where I'd hooked that from, was more in an open bit, like, you know, it wasn't so bad, and it was very well behaved, that fish. But this one was a long one that was really, really powerful. And by the time I'd gained control of it, it was exploding off of the next jetty in line, just a few yards away from me. Literally, if it had gone another 5 foot, I would have lost it, you know. All powerful and that, like Thames fish are. I got him back, got him in the net, and that was a mirror 23 pounds, but the most beautiful looking carp, you know, just an absolute belter, like long, dark, black, perfect mouth, probably hardly ever been caught, you know. But that was one of my favourite ones of the whole summer, proper carp. This is how we like them, long and scaly and dark. Classic Thames mirror. So by this point we're sort of getting on for the end of July, like, you know, and as I remember, the 5th session was one of my best. Like, I turned up, I used to turn up quite late at night. I used to leave it until all the traffic was over and that. I'd turn up sort of 10 o'clock at night. And quite often I'd spend the night, if I'd got here late, because it was all about the mornings, I'd spend the night on the boat at the moorings and then go down first thing, you know, from the first morning of the trip. Where on that occasion, mad, because I'd only caught it the trip before, I caught moonscale again. How's this for mad? Only a week after I last caught him, I've got moonscale again. I've just done a couple of quick self-takes. I'm letting him go now. So that morning spot, you know, where I was doing most of my mornings, that was really happening by that point, you know. I might only fish 3 or 4 hours each morning, but it was almost a guaranteed bite every trip. But it was later in the morning, because you didn't want to waste all day, you know, so I used to sort of time me pack up when I used to reel in from the main morning spot. I used to time it for about sort of 9 o'clock in the morning. It depended how hot it was, you know. If it was a little bit overcast and cloudy, then I might leave them out till 10 o'clock. But without fail, from there, my next stop would always be that public moorings, which, if you remember, was where I'd put loads and loads of bait through the close season. And up until then, I'd caught nothing from it. I hadn't even seen any carp there since the season had begun. But it was one of those places that you knew was going to be a daytime favourite of the carp, you know. It's where all the people fed the birds, all the ducks were fed there. Lots of boats there is where you had a tourist boat that you used to pull in, you know, and that had big engines, and whenever that used to pull in and then leave every hour to take trips up and down the Thames. And that used to kick up a lot of bottom as well, turn it all over and turn it coloured. So it was obviously going to be a spot that the carp came to at some point. And I'd got into a routine where I'd sort of pull the boat up, make 1 cup of tea, put a little bit of pellet in, and by the time I'd finished my tea, if I hadn't seen any fish, then I'd be on my way again. Well, on that occasion, I pulled in, had a look, and there was half a dozen carp there. One of them was that sort of scattered linear that I mentioned in the last film, with the white tips on its tail. I'd watched him in the close season, seen him feeding, and he was down there. Anyway, imagine, up until then I've been catching fine on my snowmans, you know, just a 15mm bottom bait with a pink snowman on top of it. So, and I had all the rigs ready to go from the morning, so I just put on a snowman rig, loaded it in, bit of pellet around it. Do you know what, they came back 3 times and they cleared me out each time. And the chance was gone then, you know, only had about an hour and a half, like, you know. But I was amazed. It made me wonder about whether I was using the right presentation for my other morning spot. But anyway, I changed then. They were obviously feeding tighter to the bottom. So anyway, I lifted out, changed to a bottom bait. To be honest with you, by the time I'd got it all sorted, it was all over, the chance was gone. But the next day, I went back, straight back to the same spot. Sure enough, the fish were about again. And this time round, I've lowered in a bottom bait from the very off, literally just a short hook link with a flipper type rig, 15mm boilie straight out of the bag, with a little PVA bag of the pellets that I was putting in, just nicked onto the hook. Complex I was using, in the complex pellets. So got the trap back in place. And I'm not sure if I've mentioned already, but I've got a little, by then I'd got a little stool in the boat, just like a little footstool, you know. And it used to be handy when I was boating up and down the river, because it gave me a little bit more height and I could see into the water either side of the boat. But it was also handy when I was pulled up. So I'd be stood up on me footstool, just that bit higher, with the old glasses on, like, you know, and you could see. Remember, they're not expecting an anchor on the boat. Those boats are covered to them, so they're coming right, almost underneath the boat, you know. But I'm watching, I could see a pale one feeding down there. And anyway, it's bolted off, the tip's gone round, big battle, like really, really powerful fish. I had this big, the tourist boat was just to my right, and there was, what are they, like half a dozen higher boats just to the left, and not moored lengthways, but moored outways, you know. So I had to be very, very careful that it didn't make it to the cover of the boats either side. Well, as soon as it surfaced, I knew exactly what one it was. It's unbelievable, this, but I said that, I've already said how one of my other mooring spots that I used to stop off to was down at the bottom lock, which distance-wise from the public mooring is probably 400 or 500 yards away. Well, this fish that I'm playing, I recognised it straight away, and it was a scaly one that only an hour or two earlier I'd been feeding at the lock, which just, again, is another example of just how far and how fast they'll travel. Anyway, by now I've got a crowd behind me. That's one of the things with the public beach, you know, you get loads of people watching. And
oh, bless him.
One of the fish I went on to catch, you'll laugh, but Chris Evans was going past with his boat, and he slowed his boat right up and was watching me play a fish, like, you know. Anyway, I got that first one in. Sure enough, it was the one I recognised, and it was a lovely plated mirror, 30 pounder, 30 pound 8 ounces, real belter. Look at that, hey?
So it sort of sounds like you're almost stalking them now, Tel.
That's exactly what it's like, boat stalking. Literally, you're watching them swimming about. I mean, you know, you might get 10, 20 minutes with nothing will come through, but you're watching all the time. That was one of the funny things. Imagine I'm stood up on my little stall and I've got my glasses on and my hat's down low, and I'm watching all the time, looking into the water, and people have walked alongside the boat, because you've got loads of people walking back and past all the time, but they walk alongside the boat and you see them looking at you, and they're looking in the edge, like, you know, watching to see what you're looking at. Of course, they've got no chance of seeing them without the glasses, you know. But yeah, really, really exciting fishing. Not much different to being on a lake, you know. I mean, completely different to the tidal. You know, where I had the boat before, that was always coloured, the water there, or most of the time. But here it was a lot clearer, you know. It was a little bit coloured for the start of the season because we had all that rain and all that flood water. But by this time, by the end of July, the water had gone clear. In fact, eventually it went too clear, and the fish sort of stopped coming. But for a short while, they were coming to that park spot, and yeah, good spot.
Dinner time. Roast pigeon covered in black pepper and salt, cherry tomatoes. In fact, I think I've caught 2 30 pounders today, so we're going to have 2 pigeons and then pudding, Victoria sponge cake and lots of fruit. Nice.
Yeah, anyway, that next night, after catching that lovely plated mirror at the park, for that evening, I pulled up at my spot, done the usual, had a lead around, got all the rods clipped up, pinged out 3 or 4 pounder boilies out there. First thing in the morning, got up. I think I've already mentioned I never used to use buzzers much, you know. If I was doing the nights and fishing into dark, then I would have carried on with the buzzers. But to be honest with you, if you're awake, there's absolutely no need for them, you know. It's not like you walk away from the rod and you feel it through the boat anyway. It sort of vibrates through, resonates right through the boat. You can feel the clutch going, you know. And the other reason for not having buzzers as well was I could get the tips down just that bit lower, obviously the height of the buzzer, which doesn't seem a lot, but it is. It gets them just that much lower. And also, once I'd picked up the rod and hooked one, I could just slide the other rods out of the way. More than often I used 2, but there were occasions when I'd stick out a 3rd one as well. And all rods were cast upriver. Like, you know, all the lines would look like they were pointing straight out that way, but obviously with the flow, you know, the lines sort of come round in the flow. Anyway, so following morning, got up, they're all ready to go, like I say, all clipped up, smack, clip, bang, all 3 rods all gone out. I can't remember I put 3 out or 2 out, but whatever, the rods have gone out. Often it'd be quiet for the first hour or so of daylight, but then sort of 7, 8 o'clock was a real hot time. And in quick succession, I had 2 bites. And I had a chunky, deep 25-pound mirror, quite a younger looking fish. Probably could have come from Oxford or something, you know, back in those big floods of 2007. You just don't know where they've come from. And I had another one, a long, lean common of 21 pounds 8 ounces, a real clean one as well, because a lot of them had been through spawning, so the odd fish did have missing scales here and there, you know, but those two were two nice clean ones. So yeah, I've done self-takes of those two, which is never easy on the boat. You know, you've always got loads of boat movement with the other boats going past. But no sooner as I'd got those two back, then I was straight back down to the public moorings where I'd caught that scaly one the day before. Same thing, pulled in, tied off the boat, got out, put a few handfuls of pellets in here and there either side of the boat, made a cup of tea, got out for another look, and sure enough there's fish feeding there already. And the closest ones were literally right off the back of the boat. And I've already said how, you know, it was awkward sometimes to even have the boat poking out. You know, they were that tight. They're right. You couldn't even see them from inside the boat. You'd have to look outside it. You know, they're right there. Same thing, little short hook link, 15mm bottom bait, little PVA bag lowered in, rods right up in the air, almost like you're watching God style. You know, watching the tip up in the air. And like I said earlier, there's no need for buzzers at all. You know, when you get a bite, you know all about it. And that time I was actually watching the line. I saw the line flicker and whip up tight well before the tip even knocked. Tips roach round, clatter across the boat, like, you know, big powerful battle. Like I say, you had boats either side of us, you had to really keep on top of them, do you know what I mean? All explosive stuff. Got him into the net, another scaly one, 20 pound, I think it was 20 pound 8 ounces. So I think you know the routine by now, you know. It would be back to the mooring spot, the morning spot in the evenings, lead up, clip up the rods, ping out a load more boilies, and then it was just a case of waiting for first light, you know. And by this time, you know, because every morning I was getting bites, you know, it was hard to sleep. You know, you just couldn't wait to get up first light. You know, got the rods out, a couple of rods out there, and I think I've already said how you're always watching the tips, because whatever one tip does, the other tip will do. They always mirror each other. You know, so and when you're backleaded, sometimes the bites can be quite subtle. Other times they can really rip round as well, as you will see. And that fight, I remember being a really powerful fish. I had it on underneath the tip for ages and ages. And I remember I had the camera going as well, and I was starting to think, and I knew the battery was dying. You know, I thought that camera's going to die any second, but I got him in, and again, it was another belt. It just seemed like every one I was catching was another scaly belt, you know, and that one was 24 pounds and was one of the best looking ones of the lot.
Oh. Look at that. I've died and gone to heaven.
So moving on to your 6th trip, Tal, was it still relentless heat at this stage?
Yeah, but you know what it's like, with all that hot weather, you know, it's often accompanied by thunderstorms, you know. And through the daytimes, I'd have that boat wide open all the time. While I was fishing, I'd much prefer to have the boat open, you know, with no cover over it. It just makes things awkward, you know, playing fish, casting. But come night time, I'd check the weather, and if a thunderstorm was forecast through the night, then I'd always put all the canopy up and close it all up, and then early in the morning, providing it was stopped, then I'd put it all down again, you know. And yeah, there was 2 or 3 nights where I woke up in the middle of the night to thunderstorms and heavy rain battering down on the boat. And like I said earlier, you know, the boat is like a greenhouse, and I was often there for 5 nights, 5 days, and so you had to be careful with your food as well. You know, whatever side the sun was shining, then I put the cool box the other side, and I used to cover it with one of my sleeping bags and snug pack and, you know, everything to try and insulate it. And also in that cool bag, you know, because it was so hot, I was taking lots of frozen drink. You know, so I'd have 3 or 4, instead of cool packs, I'd put sort of 3 or 4 2-litre bottles of frozen drink. I'd squeeze that in there. But yeah, I managed to keep all my food fresh okay, even despite the hot weather. But I'll tell you something that was quite important. It was that hot on the boat that your lines, when you come to cast out, would be like wire, you know, where it's dried the lines out. You get it at home, don't you? You know, quite often my rods, I live on my own, so I'm quite lucky they go in the living room, like, you know. And if there's a week or 2 between trips, then the line's like wire, it all goes coily. So what I was doing while I was on the boat was, once the rods were in and they were all collapsed down and lent up in the corner, then I'd soak a towel just in the river, just soak a towel in river water, and then I'd lay it over the reels. But it was amazing how often you were re-soaking it. Like, it was that hot, you know, every hour you'd feel it'd be bone dry again, and you'd have to soak it. And that was literally just to keep the lines supple, keeping the lines in good condition. I quite often do it on lakes as well. You know, if it's really, really hot, then I'll cover the reels with a wet towel.
£20
I mean, when you'd get bites, you know, it's not much different to how it is when you're fishing lakes, you know. And if you're on a lake and the sun's up from very first thing and it's burning sort of thing, then you know that bite time's going to finish a little bit earlier, don't you? You know. And similarly, if it's cloudy, then you might feel that bite time goes on a little bit later. It's no different on the river. And on that 6th trip, back on my old my morning spot, best spot for the morning bites. I remember it being a cloudy morning, and normally by sort of, there were some mornings where it was that hot I'd be reeled in by sort of 8:30, but on this particular morning I left the rods out, and that's been about 10 o'clock in the morning, you know, real late. You'd already had boat traffic started by then. Normally once the boats have started and they've got a little bit heavy, then the fish sort of pug themselves away in the little sanctuaries, you know. But yeah, I got a late bite, sort of 2/3 of the way across the river. It was late, but about 10 o'clock, yeah, a nod on the old tip's gone round. I've already said about how hard these fish fight, you know, river carp, they really do battle, but this one, my line was stretched right across the river, and I remember it exploding against, you've got like a metal sides to the island, you know, and it exploded and actually left a sprayer watermark up against the side of the island. Like, you know, line stretched right across the river. And you always have to be really careful as well. You're looking left and right for boats. You know, there were several times when I'm playing a fish and I've had to sink the tip and keep the line away from the boats. And as soon as they pass, then you lift it again, you know. But yeah, that was a real powerful fish. And it got weedier the further across the river you went as well. So it did weed me for a short while, but I plucked it free, got it all the way back in, big heavy fight under the tip. Now it's funny, as soon as I saw it in the water, I recognised what one it was as well. It's mad how it had gone by this stage, but you know, I'd shots of fish out off of that stretch over the previous few years, so I sort of had half an idea what ones were there and what ones had probably gone, the ones that hadn't been there for a long while. But this particular one, I knew it was still there. It had been caught at the start of the season, and it's one that the locals knew of as the slopey-headed dinosaur, they called it, you know. And it was shaped more like a seahorse, do you know what I mean? Like a big eye back and then big drop tail. Got him into the net, and on its last capture, it was the second biggest fish on the stretch. The biggest now, because obviously the big one, the big linner, had passed on. But it had been caught at the start of the season prior to spawning at 37 pounds, so I knew it was a big fish. And I got him in, put him on the old scales, and he was 33 pounds, so he hadn't dropped too much, dropped a bit in spawning. He's a proper old crusty, isn't he? Probably, yeah, the biggest carp on the stretch, and the #1 fish of the campaign, really, you know, the new big one. That's the one.
Now the old big linear's gone. This is the new big one. Biggest fish on the stretch.
So you've caught the new big one of the stretch. What now? Did you have anything else in mind?
That's the thing. You know, even though that big linear had gone, you know, I still had that target in the shape of the second biggest, like, you know. But yeah, I've got to be honest. And I'd caught 2 or 3 of the other big known ones. I'd been quite fortunate in the ones that I'd caught. But you know what it's like. Sort of, it takes away a little bit of the drive, doesn't it? You know, when you've caught the known biggest fish that are left on the stretch. When I was still getting amongst carp, you know, I was still enjoying myself.
There you go, a little ghosty. Pretty little thing. There you go. Like I've said before, on the old Thames they come in all shapes, sizes and colours.
There's always, you always find them in the Thames, you know, they've escaped out of people's gardens, out their ponds and what have you. But yeah, I caught that one, little flappy 8-pounder. I caught an upper double common, you know, I was still picking off fish. I even caught moonscale for the 3rd time, you know, and that was right at the other end of the stretch. But I have to admit, I was sort of dwindling by now, you know. I'd done a few trips, and every trip was a long trip as well, and I was starting to... I hadn't been in a bivvy, I don't think, since June. You know, I'd been in the boat and what have you, but I was looking forward to getting back to a lake. But I carried on the boat for a bit longer, and what I'd done, I changed from carp and tried fishing for the barbel. Although there's very few on the stretch, I thought I'll have a go for the barbel. And that meant that at that time of the year, that means the weir pools, you know, the oxygenated water. And there was one night, I fished the night in the weir pool, and first thing in the morning, I see carp showing across the other side of the weir. So it was easy enough just to reel. I was using the same rods for the barbel as what I was using for the carp. So I just reeled in, put on a snowman rig, whacked it out there, and I'd free in about an hour and a half, all in quick succession. A little fully scaled mirror, that was the second time I'd caught it. I'd caught it right at the other end of the stretch earlier on in the summer. I had a beautiful, chunky 20 pounds an ounce, a real nice plated one. The amount of scaly ones on that stretch was untrue, you know, every other carp seems to be a banger, you know. But yeah, real nice dumpy scaly one. And what else did I catch? Oh, I caught a leathery one, almost a leather. Really dark, 24 pounds, 10 ounces I think that one was. But yeah, you know, it started off as a barbel fishing trip, seen the carp show, never once missed an opportunity, put on the carp stuff, and bang, free in quick succession. On my 9th trip, which that would have been by now, we were at the start of September, I blanked. First blank since the start of the season on June the 16th, you know. But I'd done 3 nights, 3-night blank, nothing at all. I think I spent most of it barbel fishing.
I'm having a change tonight, going for the old barbel. I know there's very few on this stretch, but there's 1 or 2 giants. So, yeah. Similar to the carp tactics, I've got rid of the leg core, so we've got a couple bits of putty up the line. Took the coating off the hook link, lengthened it, just a bottom bait, 15mm sauce with a size 6. Wide gate, gripper, and a bag of pellet, complex, 8mm. Probably catch bream after bream. Oh, you never know.
You know, and I was fishing the nights by then as well. But 10th trip, I went back again with big barbel in mind. And I had one particular spot I've been putting in loads of hemp and loads of pellet. I got the rods out in the evening, and it was a spot, although there's very few barbel on the stretch, it was a spot that I knew had done a big one at the back end of the season last year. So I was concentrating on it. Anyway, I've got a big barbel on my mind, you've got to imagine, like, you know, and I've got the 2 tips out, and it's just got dark, and I see the first one pluck, and then sort of bent right over, the clutch has started going. Anyway, you know what a big barbel fight's like. They can be very explosive, you know. And I'm playing this, especially once you had it under the tip. And I was convinced I was playing a giant barbel. You know, a couple more minutes playing, you know, and by now I'm convinced, like, you know, I've got a giant barbel on the end, and it's pitch black. But I've got it into the net, shone the torch in the net, and I'm expecting to see a great big long pale coloured barbel. Shone the torch in the net, and it was a little dumpy mirror, almost as deep as it was long. Do you know what I mean? It reminded me of one that used to live in the Yateley Match Lake many years ago. One they used to call the Olympic, big round saucer, like, you know. But yeah, got him in, weighed in 24 pounds, and one of the few fish I managed to photograph on the bank. You know, most of the time you're doing the shots on the boat, but I was more tight against the bank, so I've done a few self takes of him. A bit of a welcome bonus considering I was barbelling. The trip ended with nothing else, and I think from that point on, that would have been the start of September, and I had the best part of that month off. I didn't head back then until the end of the month, and even then it was with big barbel in mind. But the weather was cooler in the daytimes by then, so I'd fished the nights for the barbel. And then in the morning I was still going down to check on that public moorings where I'd been catching the carp in the heat of the weather earlier on in the summer. And I've already said how, you know, I had a list of what carp were in that stretch of the river, or at least what ones I knew were there. You know, remember, they can travel through the locks and be gone, like, you know. But there was one that I knew was likely still there because it had been caught at the start of the season, and that was a linear, a real nice linear, like a pigeon-chested fish, zip linear, real beauty. Anyway, mad how things go. But I've gone to the park. Took the barbel rigs off, put on a couple of carp rigs, snowmans, flicked them out. Whereas in the past I've been catching them from the public moorings right off the edge of the boat, on this occasion, like where it was a bit later on in the year, I just flicked them out a bit further, you know, into deeper water, sort of 7-8 foot. Sprayed a little bit of pellet around them, 20 odd boilies, and sat. But I'll tell you what happened actually. A boat pulled in behind me and fired up a generator. You can imagine how noisy a generator, the last thing you want to generate, it'd be bad enough if it was on the bank, you know, but it was on the water right next to me. And I'd had the camera rolling as well. As soon as I got the rods out, feeling confident, I'd put the camera on. But once that boat, the generator started up and that boat behind me, I left it 5 or 10 minutes, well, nothing's going to happen now. I could feel it vibrating through the boat, you know. Turned off the camera. I tell you what, it was only 5 or 10 minutes later with a blooming generator going and everything, and the tips nodded, pulled round. Like I say, they fight like stink, like, you know, but this fish, it surfaced almost as soon as I hooked it, and it's wallowing on the surface trying to get out. If they went out too far and then kited left or right, they do you because the boat's either side. But I've kept it on a tight line and I can see it wallowing on the surface, and it's that zip linear, the one that I'd seen shots of from the start of the season. So my heart's in my mouth, like, you know. I got it in, that eventually got him into the net, and sure enough, it was definitely that fish. A little bit smaller than what had been caught out in the summer, but I put him on the scales and he was an ounce or two under 32 pounds. And out of all of the lookers, I caught some really nice carp through the summer, you know, lovely scaly ones, you know, all sorts, leathery ones, dumpy ones, long ones, all sorts. But that one was the best looking one out of the lot. 32, just under 32 pounds. And to me, it was sort of, it was the cream of the crop of what was a lovely summer on the Thames. Well, how about that? I've been away for a month. Came back last night, thought I'll have a night's barbel fishing. Barbelling was no good. Dropped into one of my old carp daytime spots for a couple of hours and caught this beauty. Just under 32 pounds, 31 pound 14 ounces. Absolutely chuffed with that one. That's what you call a proper Thames carp.
So that rounded off a lovely summer, mate, didn't it? So what you got planned next for the Lady Pearl?
Well, these moorings are lovely. It's really nice here. So I've already paid up for another year. I'll tell you something, to get into perspective for how much fishing you get done over the course of the year. You know, what did I fish from mid-June up until the end of September? Within a week of catching that linear, the Thames was in flood. And as we finish off this now, getting off for 6 months later, the Thames is still in flood. You know, so you're sort of paying a year's moorings, really, effectively, because you haven't got the close season for about 3 or 4 months fishing. Look at that. Back you go. But even taking that into account, it was so enjoyable, so good, that I'm going to keep it here for another year. And I'm fingers crossed, I'm hoping that next winter, because I haven't touched the other species yet. You know, we only kept it where it was before for 10 years because we had all the other species to go for, perch and big roach and all the rest of it. So fingers crossed that'll happen here. And I mean, this winter that's just gone, we've had more than twice the amount of rainfall that we've had every winter for the previous few winters, you know. So hopefully it's a bit exceptional, and in next winter it'll be a dry one, and I'll get a chance to have a go for all the other fish, you know, see what else is on the stretch. And after that, if it's still another bad winter and it's still in flood, then I've always said no matter what happens, the boat is never going. It's always going to be part of the Hearn family, do you know what I mean? And if it comes to it, then I shall buy myself a trailer, I shall bring it home, and it will go in the garden for a year or so. This boat hasn't been out of the water now in 11 years. So you can imagine what the underside is. All nice and clean on the outside, but on the underside of the boat, it's been in the river for all that time. I'm sure it's going to be covered in barnacles and God knows what, you know. It is time for it to come out of the water and have a bit of a clean. But it'll always go back on a bit of river somewhere, and if it doesn't, then I'll tell you what, it'll sit in the garden and I'll have plant pots all over it, just like they do on the barges, the canal boats, and I'll have flowers all growing over it. But that's not going to be happening for about another 20 years yet.